All right, we're ready to get started. I want to thank everyone for attending and thank Philip for taking the time out of his day for this webinar. I also want to thank Fathom Online Marketing for providing the go-to webinar application that we're using today. Philip is the co-founder and innovation officer over at SiteApps. I had the pleasure of meeting Philip at the Conversion Conference in Chicago. I was really impressed by his presentation on personalization and behavioral targeting. Personalization, behavioral targeting on websites is definitely the future of conversion. And this presentation should give you a nice foundation so that you too can pursue these tactics on your own. Philip, with that, you can take it away.
Sure. Mike, thank you so much for the introduction. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay, Mike.
I can definitely hear you.
Perfect.
Sounding good.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Philip, and I'm here today to actually share some of the experience I've had with our company with regard to conversion rate optimization and persuasion techniques, more specifically your website's best salesperson. Through a case on how we used Robert Cialdini's persuasive weapons to drive statistically valid lift in the click-to-cart KPI on one of the biggest e-commerce sites in Brazil. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Mike again for this opportunity, thanks to CROPA, and thanks to the Fathom team for inviting me. As I mentioned, I'm from Brazil. Sometimes that seems very far, but actually a lot of the stuff we're doing here south of the equator is very similar to what's being done up north. And just before Christmas last year, I got a call from the analytics head of the Brazilian company called Defidi. For people that are not aware of Defidi, this is one of the biggest e-commerce sites in Brazil. And this analytics head asked me what type of magic were we doing on his website to increase his add to cart metric by over 40%. I mean, he has a reasonably big team. I think it's in the dozens. They're all very intelligent people that are constantly optimizing. And I mean, this is an uber optimized site, and this is a big site. So I took this screen capture today to show you a little bit about how important Defidi is in Brazil. If we compare searches for Amazon and for Defidi, Defidi is just over 2 years old, and they're already more searched for than Amazon in Brazil, although Amazon does not have a very big presence here. About this test we did, this was a 10-month project. The data is super fresh, and we believe this test we did is some very pioneering work. Again, we're not here to sell anything. What we're trying to do here is to contribute to the science of conversion rate optimization with our abilities, limitations, and characteristics. Our most important driver was excellence in the process and the data. And we do recognize that there are some project limitations, and we're always working on evolving these. And again, we're open for criticism, suggestions, and improvements. I'd love to hear your feedback once we're done. Okay. So a little bit about our agenda. I'm going to give you a quick description of who am I, what company I work for. Then I'm going to talk a little bit what online can learn from offline persuasive techniques. Then a little bit about the actual case, what our mission was, the approach we took, the results, and then some of the lessons learned. And then I'm going to end this presentation with a little bit of information that you guys can use in your daily conversion rate optimization practices back at your site. And then we'll have a quick Q&A. But so before we get started, I'd like you to stop and think for a second. I mean, imagine interacting with the best salesperson you know. I mean, is that the person that sold you your latest car? Maybe it's someone at a local Gap shop or some other clothing store you go to. Or maybe even somebody like your brother-in-law. But I mean, think about that interaction. Really imagine an interaction. I mean, what makes a salesperson so special? I mean, why are they so fundamental to this process offline? So here's one of my favorite examples of the power of what a sales agent can do in a buying environment. I'm going to try to play this YouTube video here. Let's see if this works out. If it doesn't, I have the link here, and then we can we can try seeing this later.
Let's go check out the sedan. Oh, man. Sorry, just can't help myself.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love this car. Now, if my wife would let me, I wouldn't just drive this thing, I'd live in it. I'd only get out of it to work and sleep, and I'm not even so sure about sleep. Oh, yeah. Every meal would be drive-through. Every trip would be a road trip. All would be good with the world. I mean, there should be a statue dedicated to the person that designed this work of art. If there were, I'd be right there at the ribbon cutting, and I don't even like ribbons.
So, I mean, this guy is a pro. This is a campaign from Ogilvy, and David Ogilvy is considered one of the best salespeople ever. I mean, I invite you later to see this video. Here's the bit.ly link. You can see it in my presentation later. The question I have for you is, I mean, where is this guy online? I mean, or more importantly, how can we translate this experience, this offline experience, to the online world? So that's what I came here to talk to you about, how we can get persuasive messaging and apply it to our conversion rate optimization strategies online. But most importantly, tap into emotional psychology, the human brain, to help leverage CRO in your web strategy. So a little bit about me. As Mike mentioned, I am a Chief Innovation Officer at SiteApps. For people who aren't aware of SiteApps, I invite you to visit it later. It's an app store for websites. But basically, for our context, it's just hundreds of one-click optimization apps that you can implement on your website immediately without any technical knowledge. SiteApps belongs to Predicta. Predicta is a leading marketing services company in Brazil. We have over 150 full-time employees, and we've been around for about 12 years. We do have some very important recognitions both in Brazil and in the world. And although we work out of São Paulo, we believe there is no geographic boundary to the online, and we try to compare ourselves with some of the best players in the world and try to keep in line with some of the most innovative techniques being used all across the world. So as I mentioned, I mean, humans, we're emotional. We're emotional creatures. We're irrational. We're very intelligent, but we have what's called a lizard brain. I mean, our brain has been evolved for tens of thousands of years, and we still have a legacy of a lot of what happens in our subconscious. And sometimes most of our decisions, many of our decisions are based on irrational logic. I mean, this is one of my Beautiful Mind, one of my favorite movies, and this is a good example of how game theory, and sometimes you can work the irrational mind to create behaviors, persuade people into performing specific behaviors. Quick example of how humans function, how we work, and how we are irrational. This is a diagram of what's called the ultimatum game. So how does this work? Well, you have two people. One person has $20 that he or she can share with the other person any way they want. So that's the giver. And then the other person is the receiver. The receiver can then either accept that offer and keep the share that was designated to them, or they reject that offer and both get nothing. In other words, if I go into situation 2 where I'm the giver and I offer $10 for the receiver and I keep $10, the person will tend to accept that. However, I can also go into second situation and either offer them, keep $15 for me and offer them $5. And what happens is in industrialized cultures, more than half of the people simply reject offers that are less than 20% of the total. Even though that's more money absolutely for you, you're going to walk out with more money. For the simple fact that you knowing that other people's keeping with more money, you reject the offer, you know. So it's not rational, but that's what happens. So, I mean, how can we leverage emotion for our strategy? Well, through persuasion. So to persuade someone is to try to convince that person to undertake a course of action or even embrace a point of view through arguments, reasoning, and appeals. And what persuasion really is, it's just a deliberate attempt to influence. And guess what? Our online strategies are usually not focused on emotions. Companies do leverage emotions very strongly offline, but we do that very, very random, very few online. So I took an opportunity here to compare a little bit about the purchasing experience of a bricks and mortar store, physical store, and an online store. And here are some of the characteristics, not all of them, on how the experience is different. I mean, much more different than actually sitting down and touching the product, which is something you just can't compare. So for example, product offering. In a physical store, you have the physical limitations of the store size versus an online store. You have much more products that can be offered. Decoration and design. At a physical store, you can actually mount the product. You can contextualize the product either in a specific living room on a specific table or have the actual computer running some software. The online store doesn't have such much decoration design, just have some simple pictures. Price, that's something that the online experience tends to be a little more favorable. The bricks and mortar store tends to have more costs. Sometimes you have sales taxes, so the price is a little bit disadvantageous in the bricks and mortar store, the physical store, than the online store. Security, you go into a physical store, you walk out with the product in your hand. You know you're going to get that product. You saw the person charging your credit card. Versus online, I mean, it is still safe, but sometimes you might be purchasing from a shop you're not aware of, and maybe the product takes longer to arrive, so there's a security issue that the online store is not as good as a physical store. Product information, that's where the online experience definitely kicks butt in the physical store. I mean, online you have unlimited information. You can link to any website, you can have comments, you can have recommendations. It's all at the tap of your finger. On the bricks and mortar store, you just have what's basically the packaging and some other information available there. However, persuasive agent, salesperson, if you will, in an offline store is much favorable than an online store. I think that this is the characteristics in which the online store definitely loses to an offline store. But I mean, so the question is, how can we bring this persuasive agent into an online experience? Well, here's something we don't want to do. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this is the Microsoft Office clip. Every time you opened up Word, this little happy, funny clip would come up and ask you what you want to do, and it was terribly annoying, and Microsoft quickly removed that. So just having something there doesn't mean that that's successful. So how do online stores usually have their persuasive agencies? Usually with these chat windows. You know, you'll be going through an e-commerce shop, browsing around, all of a sudden a chat window says, "Hey, hello, how can I help you?" I mean, this is definitely an advance towards a sales interaction, but that's not the sales experience, you know. And second most important thing is the internet is beautiful. I mean, the amount of information, the amount of data points you have to create customized experience is huge. But most of the e-commerce players today, they're using these data points, they're using their conversion information to recommend other product. I mean, either to upsell or cross-sell, but very few e-commerce shops are actually focusing on that product. I mean, how can I sell this specific product that the user is seeing right now, not recommend them to another product? So we decided to think, I mean, what are the frameworks that are available offline that can help us to apply this online? So I consider this is a picture of Robert Cialdini. Robert Cialdini is a university professor at the University of Arizona. He is a top bookseller, and he's been studying persuasion and influence for decades now. And I consider him the Yoda of persuasion. And he has a very interesting framework that he uses, that he tries to tap into the emotional triggers that we tend to react to unconsciously. And he has what's called the 6 weapons of influence. And I'm going to go through these very quickly. For the people who are not familiar with Cialdini's work, I definitely recommend to learn a little bit more of what he's been doing and read his books. I have some book recommendations at the end of the webinar. And I mean, and his 6 Weapons of Influence is one of his books. You should definitely pick this up and understand this. I mean, this will help you not only in your professional life, but in personal life as well too. So let's go quickly through these, what he calls these 6 weapons of influence. I mean, these 6 weapons that we react to unconsciously. First one is scarcity or scarcity. When we think an item is scarce, we want it more. I've been a victim of this. I've spent 3-4 hours outside of an Apple store in line, 4 o'clock in the morning, in the rain, waiting to buy my iPad. I have a picture of that, and I'm pretty sure I wanted that iPad more because I knew that if I wasn't in line there, I wouldn't get mine. And we see this actually a lot in online stores. Sometimes when we're booking reservations, either for a hotel or for a trip, we see that there are only 3 rooms left or 4 tickets left. Another weapon of influence is reciprocity. We should try to repay what another person has provided us. Examples of these online, I mean, this does happen sometimes. I've seen them. Just the other day I went into a site where I walked into the site and they offered me a white paper download if I gave them my email address and accepted to be in their newsletter. So this does also happen online, and is a very effective tool. The third weapon of influence is authority. I mean, we tend to obey authority figures, even if the acts are objectionable. I mean, doctors, policemen, we just have a natural predisposition to do what they're telling, to trust them without question. And Cialdini actually points out a very interesting study he did with regard to an offline experience, which is simply crossing the street or the road when the light was on. In other words, when a pedestrian's crossing the street when they shouldn't be crossing the street. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but apparently like 2 or 3 times more people would cross the street when the light was open when they shouldn't be doing it if there was another person wearing a suit crossing the street right before them. And if that same person was not wearing a suit, they would not cross the street. So there are some aspects when we perceive something as having an authority, we tend to obey them unconsciously. The fourth weapon of influence is social proof. We tend to do what other people are doing, and we think what is correct by other people are doing is correct. And this is something we definitely see online. I mean, the race to have Facebook likes is a very good example of this. That's a very good example of social proof. The fifth weapon is commitment and consistency. Each time we comply with a specific request, it modifies our attitudes, and we tend to act more consistently with that type of action. And there are actually online studies saying that if we follow a specific brand on Twitter, or if we give a like to a specific brand on Facebook, that's the little request we've done with that brand, and we tend to maintain that we will have a bigger predisposition to consume products of that specific brand. The last weapon of influence is probably the simplest, which is liking. We tend to prefer people we know and we like. This happens a lot with celebrity endorsements and also attractive people. We just naturally tend to have a liking towards attractive people. And this is actually a picture of me with Dr. Cialdini. He has me call him Bob. He was in Brazil just a couple of weeks ago talking with us, and it was a pleasure to meet him personally. So let's get into the case. Let's tell you a little bit about what we did, how it worked, and some of the lessons learned and some takeaways you can apply to your specific cases. Well, what did we want to do? Well, we wanted to prove that online persuasion works. We wanted to create a true and valid experiment. In other words, isolate a specific element being tested and prove it statistically that we could apply a salesperson's technique on e-commerce website. So we wanted to define one simple KPI and enhance that. Also, we understand that some of these tests we have some sort of restriction to certain information, maybe sensitive data with regard to sales. So we selected the add to click KPI on a specific product page. And the last thing we wanted to do during our mission is we didn't want to screw up the regular site. And this test we were doing was in the Christmas season last year, so this was a very delicate time to be applying tests. So how do we create a sales agent online? So this was our approach. First, we wanted to make sure we had a huge and optimized e-commerce website to start with. We didn't want to have just a simple site that anything we changed would generate a lift. We wanted something that was uber optimized. Second element of our approach is we wanted an element that would be isolated to make sure that what we were changing would statistically significantly improve or not change what we were trying to test. The third aspect of our approach was a framework, and that's where we chose Cialdini's 6 weapons of influence framework. And the last aspect was the technology. This is our secret sauce. This is something that we built, and which is an adaptive and individualizing algorithm. Basically, what we wanted to do is we wanted to simulate, to represent what would happen offline. So a little bit more about these 4 aspects. I mean, as I mentioned, Dafiti is one of the leading, it is considered the leading fashion e-commerce site in Brazil. E-commerce is a little bit smaller in Brazil than it is in the US, but here are some significant numbers of what they did, and you can definitely see that they have a strong presence in the Brazilian marketplace. I call them the Zappos of Brazil, and I just want to make sure that you understand that creating any lift in this site is definitely very hard. It's very challenging. Second aspect was the creative element. I mean, what are we going to do to the product page? So this was the product page of the Dafiti, specific shoe we were using, and our element was this specific tag we placed right here on the website. In other words, we didn't change any of the other aspects. All we did is we created this what you call like a promotion tag. And we also wanted to make sure that not only would the difference of applying a tag would make a difference in a lift, so we also had neutral messages to make sure that this visually appealing image would not cause the lift by itself. Third aspect was the framework. Again, we used Cialdini's messaging, and this was also very challenging for us. Is like, how do we create messages for authority, commitment, liking, scarcity that can be applied to the online context? And there were some, and only to the product page. So there were some weapons that we couldn't find a message that we thought would definitely reflect what this individual weapon was, such as reciprocity, liking, or commitment consistency. So we decided to work with 3 weapons, which was authority, scarcity, and social proof. And then we created in Portuguese some different messages that we would be applying to the page, to the actual product page. So what I have here in this slide is a rough translation from Portuguese to English of the messages we used, all the way from authority, saying, this is recommended by the Dafiti stylists, or this is a hot item for 2012. Scarcity, this is much easier, inventory is almost finishing, there are few items remaining. And with regard to social proof, more than 10 units sold today, or clients agree this is a top product. And as I mentioned also with the creative element, we wanted to create some neutral messages to make sure that it was not the visual element that was creating the lift. So we tried, this was probably the hardest part of our test, was creating neutral messages that wouldn't be considered one of the weapons that Cialdini says. We used fast delivery, don't miss this item, and best offers. So here are the actual messages we used in Portuguese. The fourth aspect of our test was the algorithm. This algorithm had to be adaptive and individualizing. I mean, and the objective of this algorithm was to avoid any pitfalls that wouldn't happen offline. I mean, you would not show 2 different messages or the same message to 2 different products offline. I mean, the salesperson would not say, hey, this is a top seller, and then the next product you look offline, hey, this is also a top seller. So we wanted to make sure that none of this would happen in the online experience. Another thing is we didn't want to bombard specific users with all messages. We didn't want any product page to be with every product page to be with a message. And we also had to understand the reaction to the users based on these messages. So let's talk a little bit about the results. Well, we were very happy to have Malte. He's one of the Dafiti's co-founders. Besides his analytics having called me last year saying that we were increasing his lift by 40% in the click to cart. He was very impressed with what we brought to the table, and he did say that despite all of his analytics team, we did prove to bring effective lifts in the click to cart metric, and he said that we improved the bottom line. He didn't tell us how much we helped in sales, and I think that maybe he purposely wanted to avoid telling us that so that we wouldn't charge too much for using our software, but I'm sure that we did have an influence. So here's the data we did have access to. We did have a lift in the add to cart KPI lift, and this was statistically significant of 4.4%. This is a z-score of 3.93. And 4.4%, I mean, that's not double digits. That doesn't sound screaming, but I mean, this is an uber optimized website. If the conversion rate in the checkout process was maintained the same, I mean, we're almost increasing 5% in sales in this uber optimized website, just adding this very simple persuasive element. And we also had a lift with regard to neutral messages too. So we wanted to make sure we isolated the creative element and actually pinpointed that what was causing the lift were the actual persuasive messaging. So surely enough, we proved our hypothesis, and we were very, very happy with this. This was the first time we were running this test. We're actually running different variations of this test with Dafiti throughout the year as well. So we've evolved a lot on this information too. And some of the things, besides the validating our hypothesis, there were some other interesting things that popped up. Some other eureka moments, or isn't that interesting moments, that I'd also like to share with you. So here we have the different persuasion levers and their lift graphed. So we definitely have some observations here. First of all, one of the things that called attention to us was the authority triggers. I mean, every message we use with authority seemed to have a much higher lift than any of the other messages. And another thing we observed is there's a neutral message that performed very well here too. And we're like, why did this neutral message compared to the other neutral messages perform too well? And we realized that this neutral message was really just fast delivery. You know, and fast delivery has a correlation with immediacy, which can be correlated slightly to scarcity, or can be applied to other messagings as well too. So we're still working on other neutral messages and working on other messages to each of the weapons to see exactly how that influences. Another interesting point was, for some reason, scarcity didn't seem to work that well. And one of the hypotheses we had here was that scarcity is already a technique that's being used everywhere in e-commerce. You know, how many products are left, you know, buy this right now. So I think out of the 6 weapons of influence that people are using from Cialdini, this is one that's definitely being used, and I think that the users are already creating a natural filter to this. You know, it's not the bypassing our conscious and going straight into our subconscious. We're already realizing that this is a sales technique. Another challenge we had during our experience was that Dafiti was very impressed with the numbers, and they started implementing in their website some of the elements we were testing. So here's an example of their web page. I used Google Translate to translate it into English, and surely enough, during our project, they started applying some of the levers here too. So here's an example of the scarcity lever here too. So if you did have the creative element right below here saying this is one of the last ones that in our stock, it's kind of redundant here too, and we couldn't really measure the effect of that lift. And so I'd like to share a little bit about what the lessons we've learned and what are the next steps now. So one of the big challenges we had was with regard to the actual messagings, to try to create messagings that were in line with the different conversion weapons, you know, that were really, really relevant, and also trying to improve the neutral messages. Another thing we are working on very hard is actually improving the algorithm, understanding when we should use a specific message. Once we identify that a specific visitor, a user, reacts to a specific lever, let's try to use that lever specifically on other products too. We're also trying to apply this persuasive messaging not only on a product page, but on the home page and actually in the checkout process as well too. So to try to improve other KPIs beside the click to cart. And some of this early data that hopefully we'll be able to share with you on another webinar. I mean, it's very interesting and it's very promising. We've been seeing some very interesting lifts with testing some of these different characteristics. So I mean, how can you get some of these techniques that we did in our test? How can you apply the salesperson, the persuasive agents to your CRO strategies? Well, the first and most important thing is learn the science about persuasion. I mean, at the conference that Mike mentioned, the conversion conference, we talked to a lot of people, and everybody says, "Oh, yeah, we use immediacy as a strategy." I mean, immediacy. What does immediacy mean? I mean, maybe immediacy is a specific characteristic, or is applied differently to different frameworks. There are other frameworks out there as well too. I'm a big fan of what Robert Cialdini does too. But I mean, really understand the science about persuasion. Get scientific about that. Understand the different parts of our brain, how we react, how human learn a lot from what's happening offline. And mentioning offline, that's the second thing. That's the second tip I say is, like, remember the offline experience. I mean, especially context and frequency. You know, you're not going to start putting persuasive agencies on all of your products. You know, select specific products, select the context, maybe it's on their second or third or fourth product that they're viewing, maybe on their second or third visit. Same thing with frequency. I mean, Cialdini actually shows in some of his studies that when you use more than one persuasive agent at the same time, people get overwhelmed and actually decreases conversions. So don't just start creating your product page and adding all of these scarcity, social proof. No, understand the context, understand the products, understand the users, and then apply this like you would apply it offline. The third recommendation I do is for everybody that's doing tests there, even if you're not testing something that is specifically a persuasive agent, but if a specific headline you're testing or a specific call to action you're testing does have a certain persuasive technique, tag that information in your test. Say you're using a scarcity messaging or a social proof messaging, so that in the future you can go back in all your tests and run some analysis such as, oh, what was the average lift for messaging that was with regard to this specific weapon. So I mean, even if you're not applying the tests, all the tests that you are doing right now, tag this information. Use the frameworks you learned from the first bullet and then start creating metadata for your different testing strategies. And last but not least, don't forget that all the other conversion rate optimization rules are still valid. You know, so all the things you are testing right now, I mean, whether it's A/B or multivariate testing, population size, duration of the test, everything still is still valid. And also, what I do also recommend is check some of the other metrics. Even if you're testing, like I did, the click to cart KPI, see what the other metrics are being influenced by these persuasion strategies. So maybe you're applying a persuasive strategy to a specific action, and that action does have maybe a small lift, but maybe that small lift in one specific step translates to a much bigger lift further down the funnel too. That's some of the things we are observing in our testing right now. And the most important thing that I think that we want to conclude with this session is it's not only what you're selling. I mean, don't only focus on recommending other products, but how you're selling. I mean, if most approaches we have now is like, oh, I have a product page. How can I increase the total basket for that specific user? But no, how can I sell this specific product better? We have a lot of experience in that, especially with landing pages and services selling, but many times in e-commerce we forget that. So what I try to recommend is maybe even remove some of the recommendations that you're doing on your web page and try selling that product more. If the user arrived on that product page, that's a good thing. Some recommended reading with regard to behavioral economics and persuasion. Here are some 4 of my favorite books. The first one is the book you should definitely pick up by Dr. Cialdini. I'm also a big fan of Dan Ariely. He has 4 books out there. He's actually released a new one now, but Predicta Be Irrational is one of my favorites. Martin Lindstrom is also, he was voted by Time as one of the top thinkers, I think it was last year. And he's a little more skeptical. He talks a lot about what the techniques that are being used today, especially in the offline world, and he's a famous author of biology. And the last recommendation is B.J. Fogg's book about persuasive technology. He was also a speaker at the Conversion Conference, and he's been applying persuasion to online for 10 years. He's probably one of the most experienced people with this science in the online. And to conclude is we are constantly testing these different techniques in different websites, both here in Brazil, in Europe, and in North America. And if anybody is interested in participating in some of these tests, either an agency or on your website, or you want to learn more, we're exactly in this stage right now. We can get our platform, we can apply to different e-commerce websites, and we're trying to understand different cultural aspects and different types of products that are being sold to see if there's differences for these different contexts too. So here's my email, pk@predicta.net. Please send me an email if you are interested in learning more, or if you're interested in maybe creating some sort of a proof of concept or a test. I mean, we're still not selling this yet, so but hopefully we believe that we're only scratching the surface of maybe 2, 3, 5 years down the road is going to be probably one of the most used techniques to help bring people down the funnel in the online experience. So Mike, thank you once again for the opportunity. I mean, I'd love to hear some comments and questions people have with regard to the session right now. So please let me know how we should do this.
Yeah, no problem. We'll open it up to questions. You can, in the chat room or in the chat feature, enter a question. You can also use the feature where you raise your hand to ask a question. But Philip, can you, for a second, go into how through SiteApps, I know the BTBuckets functionality is now built into SiteApps, but what kind of functionality does it offer in terms of behavioral targeting and then personalization of the content?
Sure. Well, thanks, Mike. BTBuckets was our personalization platform. We launched it in 2008. We were the first self-service on-site behavioral targeting platform. We have over 10,000 domains using the platform now. And actually, SiteApps is a pivot. It's an evolution of the segmentation platform, Mike. So what we learned for people that are just getting started now with on-site behavioral targeting or trying to learn more, we realized that that's something very exciting and very sexy. Even when we released this, still sexy now. 4 years ago, it was even more sexy, and it definitely moves the needle. I mean, once you do have different home pages based on anonymous navigational behavior or technographical information, whether they're using an iPad or what time they're using, I mean, you can definitely help increase your conversion rate on your website. So, and what we've learned through our path was people would get very excited with the value proposition of segmentation. They'd sign up to BTBuckets. They'd implement our tag. It's a very simple installation. And they'd create some very neat buckets. You know, I'd have buckets of people that put specific products in their shopping cart and didn't convert, or you know that they'd have certain behaviors on a website that they were very predisposed to do a conversion, but they didn't convert. And then you could actually adapt your content or create some sort of alerts or induce or persuade people further down the conversion funnel. So what we realized is a lot of our clients would create these buckets, and then they send us an email contact to say, hey, you guys have a neat thing. We created these really buckets that they're very valuable segments, but how do we interact with them? How do we send specific messages, and how do we update our content? And we tell these sites, hey, you know, integrate BTBuckets into your ad server or into your content server or a specific widget. And a lot of these people, which are usually marketing people, or optimization people, like, oh wow, damn it, I gotta go talk to the IT folk, I don't know what sprint I can do this, and they get kind of bummed out. So that's when we realized that the challenge wasn't creating these uber segmented clusters in your website, but actually adapting your website based on even more simpler behavior. You know, if somebody already came to your website, show them a different message when they arrive on your home page. You know, maybe don't show them if they saw a video, which is the biggest part in your home screen. If they already saw the video, don't give it so much contrast. Don't call too much attention to it. So when we realized this, we realized, hey, what if we created some instant one-click optimizations that any website could use, and then apply that to any behavior? So I mean, maybe I want to show a sticky note, a post-it note to users that came from a specific referral or on their 5th visit to my website. Doing something like that is very complicated. So that's when SiteApps was born, which is basically an iTunes app store for websites, which we have hundreds of one-click installations apps that can be installed on your websites. And when you include the segmentation aspect to these apps, you can actually have some very, very interesting optimizations that can be done on a website. So ultimately, what we're aiming for in the future is bringing in persuasion levers as well as another tool to create different experiences too. But I mean, that's what SiteApps is. It's this instant platform where you can install the tag once, and then without any IT knowledge, you can create some very amazing changes on your websites and things that definitely help with regard to CRO.
Excellent. Again, you know, if you have questions, please post them up here. Here we go. From Trisha McCune. In your example, the authority trigger won out. Are there triggers you've seen that tend to work better than others for e-commerce, or is it different from case to case?
I think that's a very good question. What we realized is, well, one of the things we're doing is we're changing the point of view from the product, and we're focusing on the person. In other words, our algorithm is trying to understand, for example, Mike, when you're visiting a specific website, what are the triggers that work best with you? So that was one of our hypotheses, and we realized that that depends. Maybe when you're shopping for, I don't know, diapers on your kid on diapers.com, you react to certain triggers. But when you're purchasing, for example, the new Galaxy S3 or the new iPhone on bestbuy.com, you'll react to other triggers. So what we realized that it really depends also on the context, on the product. It's not only the person that's actually behind the screen that's visiting the website, but it's also the product that they're seeing too, the product category or the website. And in this case specifically, I mean, the Fidesz shop more towards shoes. They started with shoes and clothes. So for some reason, maybe our authority messages rang a better bells with the public that was actually visiting this site. You know, like stylist tips. You know, this item is a must in your closet, or it's a hot item for 2012. We're doing some other tests. I mean, there's another site we're doing a test which sells electronics, and for some reason we realized that social proof really worked on that specific site. So maybe depending on what product you're selling on your website or what category of products, you can try different levers to see which one works best. You know, and one of the things we're doing in our tests here too is that we only had I think it was like 12 different messagings we were testing. Let me see how many we have here. The new testings we're doing now, we have almost hundreds of different messages too. And I mean, here you have an example where one of the message was almost 9% and some of the messages were 2%. So I mean, that's almost 500% difference between one and another one. So my recommendation is try at least one of each, or try as many as you can, and optimize on top of them. And if you do identify that there is some sort of a pattern like we see here with regard to authority, create more of these messages as well.
All right, we have another question. How long do you think it will be, or 1 second, how long do you think it will be integrated, persuasion technologies and strategies with ad networks, ad exchanges, and technologies for media buying and selling? So, you know, I believe it's saying how long do you think it will be until it's integrated with ad networks, ad exchanges, and technologies for media buying?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I could buy that right now, I would. I mean, being able to, I mean, with a lot of the DMPs, you know, the data management providers such as BlueKai, they already offer different demographic information about the visitors, the users, and their predisposition to certain categories. I mean, if I knew that somebody visiting my website was more, I don't like the word vulnerable, but would react to a specific persuasion lever, I mean, that's something I can leverage. You know, I can change my messaging on a website based on if somebody reacts more to authority or basically if somebody reacts more to social proof. I mean, we have studies showing that we create opinions on specific websites in fractions of a second. Many people don't even go below the fold. So if I had that big headline, you know, I have one opportunity to create a very good first impression, and I knew that that person reacted to a specific lever, whether that's in an ad, whether that's on my website, I would definitely use that. So I think that once we do have more experience, we do have more people using these different techniques, whether it's Cialdini's or any other one, I think we definitely see that going on too. One of the challenges is that this is something not as scientific, it's not as mathematic. I mean, either you're boy or you're girl. I mean, if you're 35, you're 35. And with regard to different persuasion levers, sometimes you react almost the same for authority for social proof versus scarcity and reciprocity, and it's also very contextual. But I mean, I think that as the technology evolves, as we gather more information on how people react, I mean, I believe that this is definitely going to be another input in media plans throughout the world when they purchase media through different ad networks or real-time bidding.
All right, there's a follow-up question. So basically, you know, do you think the algorithm can be integrated so that in real time the content will change based on the advertising source? Luis,
yes.
Yeah, well, if I didn't present that question correctly, please type it again. Oh, it's the same question. Never mind. So
I think, yes, I mean,
I believe you answered that one.
No, just let me go a little bit out this. I mean, another thing is people change too. I mean, as I mentioned, as we noticed that scarcity was not creating as much lift as we originally thought. I mean, our brains evolve. We start understanding how people are pushing our buttons, and we learn too. So I think once we start seeing a lot of authority calls, and we start realizing that, you know, everybody starts using these techniques, I think that naturally you tend to the mean. So I mean, we definitely not only have to evolve which lever we're reacting to, but the actual messaging is what's the best way to translate a commitment relationship, you know, or a reciprocity relationship. So I think a lot of the innovation that's going to be coming in the next couple of years is not only applying of what's happening offline, because of technology we can learn so much faster, we can test so much faster, but actually getting into the very details of these specific levers, you know, and getting into an understanding. Maybe there's a subcategory of authority lever that we can leverage online. So, I mean, I think that's something we'll definitely see too. A lot of maturity with regard to what is the best messaging. So I think it's not only about technology. I mean, you still need people that are very good at copywriting. You still need people that are very creative in creating ads and understanding a lot of how the human brain works to help persuade people.
Excellent. We have an additional question here. We're being asked, can you go through the top 3 authority converters again?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's go over that right now. So these were the 3 messages we used in the authority lever here. Again, these messages were created in conjunction with the actual Defeaty team. We at Predicta, we understand a lot about conversion, but we don't understand that much about selling fashion online. So they helped us create these messages here too. I'm gonna flip back and forth to the version in Portuguese too, but I mean, I'll provide these slides online. Mike will then post it to the CROPA website so that you can later get into any of these specific messages, or if there's any specific data that was in a presentation you want to review with a little bit more time, these slides will be available online.
All right. Additional question. The brilliant Moogle. His question is, are not the influence messages correlated / biased with font sizes? How do we know it is a visual effect or a message effect?
That's a great question. It's funny, like even in Portuguese it can be concise. What we try to do is minimize the visual effect was creating neutral messages. You know, one of the things we didn't test was the actual size of the message. So I'm looking at this right now. For example, in our neutral messages, we didn't have any message with 2 lines of text. What we're doing now to definitely try to eradicate any other influence of the visual effect is that we're testing hundreds of messages. And not only that, but we're testing different visual effects too. In this test, we only had one element, which was this tag. You know, that was the only element we were testing. Now in a new test, we're actually testing what's written. So for example, one product description will be using messaging that's trying to focus more on authority. Another will use scarcity, the actual headline, different ways of changing the product page and the funnel based on these different levers. But I mean, that could be, what we try to do is we try to change the minimum possible to really try to prove that the messaging was causing the lift too.
Excellent. Any other questions at this point? If not, then I'll wrap it up. 5, 4. All right, I think we're good on questions. Philip, I mean, I personally think this is definitely the future of conversion rate optimization. You know, behavioral targeting, measuring behaviors, and then presenting personalized content based on those behaviors. And I thank you very much for presenting today. Also, you know, want to thank Fathom once again for providing the go-to webinar. And CROPA.net, please check that out. The next webinar, I still need to schedule it, but it's with Arjan Herring He is a science rock star. That's what he calls himself. He is a co-founder of Persuasion API, which also is based off of Cialdini's Weapons of Influence. So I look forward to that presentation in the future. And please visit SiteApps. I posted also Twitter links within the chat room. So please follow Phillip, myself, and CROPA on Twitter. And that wraps it up. Thank you all for attending. And I'll be posting. I'll post a link to the presentation as well as a video on YouTube. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Phillip.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.